Color grading is an incredibly daunting thing, particularly for new filmmakers. When I started filming, it took me so long to get into making videos because I was so overwhelmed with color grading and I didn't even know what log was. And I was using Premiere Pro, which wasn't the best. And then I finally switched over to DaVinci, which just blew my mind even more and was incredibly overwhelming. There's just so much going on. And I'm putting this video out for new creators or people who are struggling with color grading as something that I wish I had found 2 years ago when I started that journey. I'm going to be talking about the plugin called DaVinci Pro. Now this plugin is pretty much for any video editing software, DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, and it has changed the entire way that I color grade for the better. And this comes from someone who created and sells their own LUT packs for video. So this is detrimental to me and my business, me putting this video out there, but this has changed the way I edit and this will change the way you edit. And is honestly the best area to put your money in if you're looking to purchase something to help with your color grading. Now I just want to say thanks to DaVinci as they did give me a trial copy of this plugin, but no money has exchanged hands for this video and they don't get any input in what I'm talking about. I'm just sharing my experience with this, and mainly because I wish that there was a video like this out there when I first started color grading, because I firmly believe that every new videographer out there should invest their money in DaVinci. Now I know that these purchases just continue to rack up. You've got drones that you're buying, you've got cameras that you're buying, you've got video editing software like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro that you're buying. But the nice thing about DaVinci is that they give you so many different options. You can go a month to month, you can do a 6th month, or you can do a lifetime purchase. Now that's something that we don't see that often these days. I'm looking at you, Adobe, but the days of subscription models are over. Now, if you stick to the end of this video, I'll give you a discount code to get 10% off any of the offerings that DaVinci has. But enough of me telling you about why I think it's great. I'm going to show you why I think it's great with a short film that I made whilst I was in Iceland about a month ago. So let's dive on into one of the scenes that we saw in my mini Iceland film and go over some of the things that you'll see when you pull up the DaVinci plugin and kind of my thought process in how I edited and graded this scene. So we're working with the scene right before the Iceland title card. I'm not going to go into details on how DaVinci works. This is not a DaVinci Resolve video, but I do have a power grade that has some nodes that are used before and after my node that has DaVinci in. So we're going to throw the DaVinci Pro plugin into a node, and then some things auto-populate. I'm just going to close all these windows real quick and kind of go through what I work in, as I don't use all of these things. So input is where we get our color space transform. So you don't have to use a color space transform node if you don't want to. You can, and if you do use a color space transform node, then you're going to want to set the source to Rec 709 if that's what you transform it to. But obviously I don't like to. I like to keep everything in this plugin. It's the whole convenience factor of this option. So I'm going to choose my camera, and then I'm going to go to Sony. I've got Canon on the mind right now, and then FX3 and S-Log3, S-Gamma3.cine. So right now, this is very noisy and it does default grain on. So I'm just going to go and turn this off real quick. Turn that off and we'll talk about that in a minute. So Right off the bat, we've got our exposure comp values, temperature, so white balance, tint, defringe, I don't mess around with. So before I dive into those exposure compensation values, I'm gonna go down to the film window, the film tab. This is where the whole benefit of Dehancer is. They've put a ton of money in R&D and research and planning, preparation into making these legendary film stocks that we're all familiar with. So I love to use Kodak Vision 3. Obviously, Interstellar was filmed with that, so I've been leaning toward that a lot lately, and one of my go-tos is 50D. So I believe the 50 is the ISO, so the light sensitivity, and the D stands for daylight, and T stands for tungsten. So color grading in my office, I use the tungsten because it kind of fits with the lights that I use. I should probably use tungsten for this scene, but I liked the way that 50D looked, so I'm gonna roll with 50D for this scene right here. So once I've added my film stock, you can see that there is a push and pull slider. So this will give us a little bit more latitude with that film stock itself. Something to do with the film developing process. I'm not a film photographer or filmmaker, so I don't really know exactly what this is relating to, but it just kind of, if we push all the way to the left, it takes away some of the contrast, it flattens the darks and the shadows a little bit, and it goes a little bit more teal. And if we pull all the way to the right, gets a little bit more contrasty, and it's a little bit more on the deep blue stroke, somewhat purple side. So we're gonna stick somewhere in the middle, as I kind of like that. And then I'm gonna open up the print drop down. And then I tend to just work with the print sliders and the input sliders to get the exposure that I feel works well. I feel that the exposure comp and the exposure EV slide work really well with each other. So I just do this to kind of balance the contrast. Color density, I will usually crank up, but I don't want to oversaturate this scene, so I'm going to leave it somewhere around like 20-ish. And then I don't use the temperature comp slider. I actually add a node before my Dehancer node, and I do my white balance that way because I feel that the Dehancer temperature comp sliders don't really work too well. If I go warm, it kind of pushes it a little bit too green, and even trying to balance it out with the tint, it doesn't really work. So I'll tend to just leave those and then do a separate node beforehand. Film Developer, I don't use that one. It does give a color boost there, but I feel it's just kind of a little bit too strong, so I tend to leave that one disabled. Film Compression, I also don't mess around with. Expand kind of gives us more flexibility over our contrast. So we've got the black and the white point, and then this just kind of gives you a little bit more control over your contrast. So if we want to flatten the image a little bit, we can bring the black point down to the left, and then we can add contrast back in whilst keeping those crushed blacks and shadows with the white point. So it's just a balancing game, just kind of seeing what you like and what fits with the scene itself. One thing that I've been working in lately is the color head. This is something that I've kind of been learning as I've been going. I've only started using it a couple of weeks ago, but this just kind of keeps you out of this color wheels and all of those things in DaVinci Resolve. You know, if you're paying for this program, you might as well use it all. And it just keeps everything in one single area and just makes things a lot more simple in that color grading process. So it's pretty self-explanatory. We've got yellow, blue, magenta, green, and cyan and red. And you know, if we shift these sliders, it's going to shift the scene. So I'll just mess around with these and see what works well with the scene and where I find a nice balance in the tonalities of the colors. And then we've got our standard kind of shadows, midtones, and highlights that we, you know, if you're familiar with Lightroom, you've got those wheels. This is kind of the same thing. They're just sliders, not wheels. So if we want to warm up our shadows, we can do that. If we want to warm up our midtones, we can do that. And I just use these to kind of find a nice balance of the skin tones. I don't like to do local adjustments to skin tones or anything really, as it just overcomplicates things. And I want to simplify my color grading process as much as possible. So I just use these sliders to kind of find a balance between the skin tones and the rest of the scene. And it works quite well. I haven't really had any issues. So just kind of an overview of the rest of these. So those ones are kind of our main, like primary color grading and all those things. And then the rest are kind of a more artistic style that you just experiment with. So film grain is self-explanatory. I tend to add some. This is obviously a noisy scene in of itself. And then I like to go to 65mm 50 ISO. It's a little bit finer noise grain. And then you can kind of play around with the amount. And I tend to keep it low, nice and subtle. Halation and bloom are two other ones that I most of the time use. halation, I'll use a Super 8 halation, and then I tend to bring it down as it can be very overwhelming in a scene. People tend to go a little overboard with halation these days, but you know, if you look at movies that have it, it's very subtle, and there's a fine line between good halation and terrible halation. So I'll keep that low. And then I do like to add bloom just to kind of soften those highlights and the light fall off, particularly around the subject. So, but once again, same with the halation, I like to keep the bloom low as well. And then I don't really use any of the others, but just kind of a brief overview. Film damage, self-explanatory. It's kind of the damage that you'd see on old film, like squiggles and lines and all of that stuff. And the nice thing is it's animated in this, and a lot of people pay a lot of money for those kind of plugins or overlays, but you get it all with DeHancer Pro. And the same goes for film breath, which is kind of inconsistencies with film, kind of showing like color shifts, particularly with older film like Super 8. Film breath is a nice thing. It's not something I've played around with, but it does allow for a little bit more artistic vision with your videos. And then gate weave is where like the gate of the film in the developer module, I think, or maybe it was in the actual filming process, would kind of shift. So you kind of get that small movement in like a still frame. Kind of nice to use if you're filming on a tripod. It makes it look like it's a little bit handheld, but also can be done poorly, and it will obviously look poorly if done poorly. Overscan, probably familiar with this. It's where you can see the sprockets over the film. Also kind of a controversial topic because not every film stock would have that visible. Super 8 does, but some other film stocks, which you have options on here, those sprockets would not be visible. So you may upset some purists, but it is a kind of a cool thing. It's kind of a trendy thing. So once again, people pay a lot of money for those plugins or overlays, but DeHancer has you covered and included with DeHancer Pro. And then the rest, vignette, self-explanatory. Monitor just shows some things on the monitor itself. Output just allows you to have the intensity of the grade itself if you wanted to tone it down a little bit. And then LUT generator allows you to generate everything you've done as an individual LUT if you wanted to save that for later and not have to go through that whole process again. So I firmly believe that if you're starting out, you should definitely consider picking up DeHancer. They have a free trial, so just try out the trial, see how you like it. It is limited to 1080p, but it's definitely worth it. I cannot guarantee enough. If there was one thing that I was going to buy, whether it was upgrading a camera or getting DeHancer Pro, it would be DeHancer Pro, because most affordable entry-level cameras can, even my iPhone can film in log these days, and it doesn't even matter because you don't need to film in log for DeHancer to work and to get you color grading and to see how different film stocks work and react to different scenes, and it's all part of that learning process. So I firmly believe it is an incredibly good investment. And as promised, you can use the code JROMES10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. If there's any questions about DeHancer, if you pick it up and there's something that I didn't cover in this video, don't hesitate to drop a comment down below or reach out to me on Instagram at JohnnyRomes. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, I'll see you later.